extra year.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think right now is a good time to break Judah to come up. I think
Now that you've got everybody warmed up.
Yeah, I didn't want to pray to leave here without the opportunity to tell us all of the problems we're going to have and how he's going to work them out.
Good morning, everyone, and let me first of all thank Len Munson and the League. You all have for years now tried to raise and heighten the awareness in our community with regards to how we've been abandoning our youth and what we can do to try to correct that very critical challenge. And I would and do appreciate an opportunity to comment. I appreciate Candace's presentation. And from the audience, there were some very salient and important remarks that I would like to touch on also. First of all, let me just say that looking back now at the time when I started coaching Little League in this community, I coached for approximately 16 years. And I stopped when my son actually went on to high school, and I threw batting practice to the high school team. But as far as coaching Little League, I had stopped 4 years ago, so it's over 20 years ago when I first started coaching Little League. And at that time, it was possible that on a team of 12 to 15 players, I might have one, maybe two kids from broken families, divorced parents. 15 years later, fast forwarding, 8 to 9 out of 12 kids were coming from homes with divorced parents. And I'm not saying that you lay the blame on the parents that ended up going through that divorce. There's a lot of stress and strain and just incompatibility that occurs, but clearly the stability that once was there for children has disappeared. And I will say that even with a single mom, a lot of credit has to be given to that single mom or single dad raising children who make the commitment to provide the time, as Miguel had talked about, willing to read books when the child is at a very early age, correcting the homework assignments instead of watching CSI or Survivor, getting up early in the morning to be with that child, maybe taking that child to school, or on Saturday foregoing playing golf and taking that child to soccer or to Little League or to Pop Warner football. It's all about making sure as adults that we prioritize when we bring children into the world that we're going to sacrifice and do whatever it takes to provide that structure, that support, that nurturing environment to raise our children. And to a large extent, that's not happening. And so it does take a village out of necessity, because parents, single moms, single dads, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, have walked away from their responsibility. There are a lot of good parents out there. There are a lot of good children, but too many have fallen through the cracks, and it has affected us as a community. We just had a wonderful, and I really credit Commissioner Hall and the rest of my colleagues in supporting the detox outpatient facility that Southwest Florida Addiction Services just had a groundbreaking on Evans Avenue in the city of Fort Myers. Councilman Randy Henderson being part of that effort in donating the land. And our county, even through economic difficult times, a couple years ago agreed to provide up to $2 million for a $9 million project. And that, as Kevin Lewis had indicated, the groundbreaking the other day was the tipping point. And he was able to bring in the various foundations that provided additional funding support, so that now they're well underway with the groundbreaking. A detox outpatient facility had not been built in Lee County in over 50 years, and we know there's just an overwhelming need. And the beauty of that, once it's up and running, is those parents, those adults, as we all know, as human beings have strengths and we have weaknesses, and sometimes those weaknesses prevail over our strengths, and sometimes it's important to have that kind of treatment, care, counseling type of program that one can enter into to overcome that weakness and become a better parent, become a better guardian. And so that helps the child in the long run by having a kind of facility that's now going to be here in this community in another, I guess, 18 months, maybe less. I look at what Lee County did in a very proactive way with the Lee County School Board and the Lee County Sheriff's Department a number of years ago in developing what was called an alternative school suspension truancy program. We heard about suspension. Yeah, that's a real sanction on a child. They love it. Please don't throw me in the briar patch. And what we felt as a community was it hurts the school because the child is not in attendance. They oftentimes, of course, the way the formula is based on money from the state, need to show attendance in classrooms for enhancing their revenue stream that they need to provide for appropriate education to the children. So we wanted one to get that child back into school, but we wanted to make sure before that child was to attend school again that we tried to focus on why it was that that child was suspended to begin with. And we felt, let's have an environment where, and we started in Suncoast Elementary, I believe it was, where we had a program, and the first person that actually helped start that program was Bob Snedden. And I don't even know if Bob Snedden is still with the Lee County Sheriff's Department, but he was a former educator and a law enforcement officer. And so he developed a program. It wasn't a babysitting program. It was an opportunity where the children had time to make up their homework assignments, build up their self-esteem, engage in conflict resolution discussions, and were able to get back on track instead of being in an environment where their parents were not home and more than likely were out creating mischief. That program was to have expanded, and for a variety of reasons did not. And I think it was most unfortunate because we showed a remarkable success in increased attendance and a turnaround of those children that were fortunate enough to have been enrolled in that program and then ultimately back into the schools. I would say that a meaningful change would be to resurrect that program in a more meaningful way and provide the funding. And that would require the school board and the county commission, through funding with the Sheriff's Department, with an understanding that that's a proactive intervention type approach that the sheriff would embrace and support. And the county commission would have to be willing to provide the additional dollars to reactivate and enhance that program. I was reading the other day where there's a legislator that's looking at sponsoring a amendment to the budget that would reduce school funding by $500 million.
I saw that.
And I'm thinking, here we are, one of the wealthiest states in the nation, and we're 46th out of 50 states in per capita spending per student. I mean, it's an abomination. It's an embarrassment. And I think this legislator wants us to be 50th. It just amazed me, especially when you put in the context, and somebody touched on it, when you look at our prison system, and you realize that 80% of those prisoners do not have a high school education, and we spend over $30,000 a year per prisoner, and $5,600 a year per student on operational expenses. There's a real disconnect. So it's not the fact that the money's not there, it's how it's being spent and how it's being prioritized. And I just shake my head thinking that the state constitution mandates that there has to be an adequate and reliable funding source for our public schools, for public education. But guess who's in charge of determining what's reliable and adequate? Our state legislature. So it really is incumbent upon our community to impress our legislature that it is more cost effective, that it's far more beneficial to really look at the long-term solutions, like an alternative to school suspension truancy program, like being able to fully fund our public education system. I read, I think it was yesterday, talking about even cutting back on Bright Futures. You know, McGilligan just talked about if anything should be free in this country, it ought to be an education. But my gosh, to exclude people well-deserving, hard-working youth that want to take that next step and to preclude that opportunity, to me, is just a travesty. Lee County has tried in so many ways to recognize that there are a number of ways to help our youth. One is through activities. There's nothing like getting a child running around for 3 or 4 hours to tire him or her out before he or she goes home at night, hopefully to have a sit-down dinner with whether it's a single mom or a single dad or parents, but all together at the table with no TV on, no radio on, and just discussing what went on that day. How delightful it would be if all of us could spend at least one meal a day with our children, just to talk about how the day went. I remember, as busy as he has been over the years, former governor, former U.S. Senator Bob Grant always stressed the importance that as busy as he was throughout his political career, and he was into everything, he always had a sit-down meal with his family, at least once a day. Obviously there were some exceptions. But I just thought, wow, he's got a great value system. Because all it is an investment in time. And my gosh, what a difference that makes. But we in the county feel strongly enough about after-school programs. Not quite to the extent of what Candace was talking about, but still a type of system in which it's a constructive environment for children to take school buses to Estero Community Park or to Veterans Park. There's any number of parks that the county has where we have programs after school where kids can get into martial arts, dance, music, computer skills, just plain old recreation, run around, dodgeball, and then picked up afterwards by their parents or support family. And I think that says a lot about how Lee County government feels about our commitment in working with the school district to get the kids off the streets and either into the classroom or into recreational programs where they can be looked after, supervised, and can enhance their skills in life. I have to say that as we look at the legislature and their efforts to try to balance a budget where they're looking at about $3 billion shortfall, and I think to myself, gosh, the internet, and the legislature has yet to look at tapping the internet sales tax. Those businesses in brick and mortar certainly have to pay their sales tax, some, because the legislature does exempt $25 billion a year out of a $70 billion budget. And certainly we all recognize if they would just pare down or eliminate many of those sales tax exemptions, we could lower property tax, we could lower sales tax, and we could still provide enough funding for these critical youth programs, for health care, for education, for enforcement, law enforcement. But this is such a special interest state. I've said it before, outside of Louisiana, it's probably the most special interest state in the nation. And it's the disproportionate way in which this money is allocated and prioritized that is hurting all of us. I just was at a function yesterday where, in terms of the disbursement of dollars per mile of road on our state highway system, we are 48th out of 50. And it's no wonder Lee County has had to advance $10 million for State Route 82 and is looking at advancing $35 million to do the last 6 laning of US 41 between Corkscrew Road and San Carlos Park. And we all know the importance of having enough capacity to handle volume of traffic. But it's the county that's had to shoulder this burden. And that, I know if I ask for a show of hands on Amendment 1, maybe not so much in this room, but probably a majority of you supported it.
No.
I don't know. Probably not in this room because you're pretty darn informed and well educated. And believe me, I appreciate that response. But I would submit clearly, I mean, it was overwhelmingly supported by the state. And you look at how that low-hanging fruit was dangled before the voters. My goodness, double the homestead, $240 tax savings. And then when you think about that mom or that dad that was relying on the after-school program or the recreational activities at some of our parks, now Lee County is going to have to say, gosh, because of the reduction in revenue, it's a $20 million hit to Lee County, what program are we going to have to eliminate or what hours are we going to have to reduce? And then that mother or dad who thinks, gosh, I saved $240 here, but now it's going to cost me $540 to provide either after-school care or provide for some other private recreational program that I'm going to have to enroll my child into, then you start to see it doesn't add up. What's wrong with this equation? And so, folks, the money's there. I just gave you an example of the, actually I didn't tell you yet, but in terms of the, if we were to impose a sales tax on internet sales, $2 billion to the state. If we were to actually investigate when in 1998 the legislature repealed the intangible tax, between 1998 and 2007, today if that tax was still there, $1 billion. And people would say, but you know, that was a well-meaning tax. Well, folks, I don't know how many here in this room would raise their hand as a taxpayer. The first $250,000 in your asset portfolio was exempt. If you filed jointly, it was $500,000. I think that probably covered all of you. It certainly covered me, but it didn't cover one particular governor or the upper 1% echelon in terms of income in this state. And unfortunately, again, there was a priority given to a select few that adversely impacted this state. I'm a Republican, just like Miguel, just like Commissioner Hall. But my gosh, there's got to be a sense of balance in terms of how we take the resources in this incredibly wealthy state and start to proactively address critical issues like in taking care of our youth. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you all very much.
Everybody take a break, but wasn't this a good show? Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And our lunch, before we have dessert, we'll make that announcement.